Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session Connecting Curricular Learning and Career Preparation, a Path Toward Holistic Student Success. I'm Ashley Finley. I'm the Vice President for Research and Senior Advisor to the President at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And I will be moderating the session today. I have three amazing guests with me to talk about this issue that I will ask for them to introduce themselves in just a moment. But by way of contextualizing our conversation for the next 40 minutes or so, uh, you have the session description, but I think one of the things that's really struck me about this topic, and the very reason that I reached out to these three amazing scholars and educators and practitioners, is because it strikes me that learning and career preparation are often seen as a binary at what we do at colleges and universities, as if the outcomes of one do not somehow relate to the skills of the other. And in fact, we know from employers that the skills that they most value are in many ways exactly what colleges and universities espouse to provide in terms of both essential learning outcomes and career competencies. You'll hear a little bit about those essential learning outcomes from the AAC&U hat, and certainly about the NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, career competencies. But capabilities like critical thinking, written communication, teamwork, ethical reasoning, there are all common threads across many of the things that we're talking about that matter to us in terms of students' learning and development. But when we confuse the language of goals and the language of the student outcomes and the goals that we're seeking for students, we know that students lose because they lose the piece of how their learning is connected and how it extends right beyond the courses they're taking and into their lives beyond not just the curriculum, but beyond campus and into who they become as professionals and as community members as well. So when we think about what that equation looks like for students, it's not just that all students lose, but we know that's particularly salient for students from historically marginalized populations. Those have been traditionally underserved by higher education, who themselves are not just looking for a college education to get them a job, but they're looking for lots of other things too, like social mobility, fulfillment, a sense of purpose. And of course, those are all the same things that many of our students are looking for. It's just that simply the stakes are higher when we talk about students from marginalized populations. So as I mentioned, I brought together three amazing scholars and practitioners to help us think through how to more authentically and intentionally align learning outcomes with career preparation to support our shared commitments to equity, access, and of course, student success. So with that, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Sherry Braxton Costanza. Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Sherry Braxton Costanza. I'm the Senior Director for Digital Innovation at Bowdoin College, and I'm also a consultant for the System of Maryland through the Kirwan Center of Academic Innovation, focusing on digital credentials. I do a lot of work in the digital credentialing space. I'm on the governing body of the Trusted Learner Network out of Arizona State University. Yay, Brandy. And I am a co-chair of the One Ed Tech Digital Credentials Innovation Leadership Network, and was the co-chair of the Open Badges 3.0 working group under them. So I'll be talking a lot about how we can use digital credentials to ensure that the transparency of the skills that students are gaining is captured in a way that they can share it and have agency over it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Mary, let's go to you next.
Thanks, Ashley. My name is Mary Gatta, and I am the Director of Research and Public Policy at NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And we are a member organization of career service professionals and also on the industry side, university recruiters. So I lead research focused on college students and career outcomes and their experiences, what employers are saying, and what's happening kind of benchmarking at career centers. So prior to this role, I did spend 25 years in the classroom. I was a faculty member at Rutgers and also at CUNY, at City University of New York. And when I was at CUNY, I was also the faculty director of our Ethnographies of Work course, which was a first-year course at Gutman Community College, where really embedding career into the classroom in ways that are academically rigorous, but really provide students with the theory and the experiential experience of work. And I also was one of the first CUNY faculty career success fellows. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about embedding career into the curriculum and that connection that you talked about, Ashley, between the learning side and the career side.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Brandy.
Hi, Brandy Poppenden-Smith. I serve in a role here at Arizona State University as director of a unit called Work Plus Learn. We're a portfolio of a couple different programs and initiatives, and what we're really looking at is how do we redesign the academic and the student experience for a working and learning future. So our work really dialed into things like student employment, other types of experiential learning broadly, and also really increasing and scaling this concept of work-based or work-integrated learning so that our students, by the time they graduate, have several touch points, several opportunities to engage in work-based learning experiences.
Thank you. All right. This group knows how much I love them. They know how much I respect them. And I'm just super excited to have this conversation. So let's, hey, I'm a sociologist by training, as is Mary. You'll find this from our background. Like tends to like. There's just got to be at least a couple of sociologists in the mix. And as I like to say, we're all really sociologists at heart. But that leads me to say that I feel like we should just start with some data. Right, let's just get some data out there. Let's start with some findings from the field regarding equity and career preparedness. Mary, as you know, we recently, you and I and Patrick Green, our pal at the Society for Experiential Education, combined AAC&U, NACE, and C. We just released a national study examining faculty attitudes and behaviors regarding embedding curricular career preparedness into the curriculum. We had about 6,880. I did check that number right before we got online here. But a darn good sample size for this. But we found, for example, that although 80%, we were all a little surprised by this, but although 80% of the faculty who responded to that survey reported that they do connect career outcomes in their courses, and 70% report sending students to the Career Center, fewer than half of faculty actually draw upon Career Center resources or expertise to advise their students. Additionally, when we actually asked them some questions about how do you do this within your courses, what does that course-based integration look like, only about a third of faculty reported that they engage students in a career-oriented project or reflection. And those are two aspects of what we might say are high impact practices. That kind of application and reflection are two qualities of high impact practices that we would look for. So we need to ask ourselves questions of, even if faculty think they're doing this, to what degree are they doing it with certain layers of depth and intentionality? So speaking of high impact practices, NACE has been gathering, which I love and have long relied on, has gathered some really compelling evidence over the years around access to internships and other high impact practices in the curriculum. Would you tell us just a little bit about what NACE has found along those lines?
Sure, absolutely. So just to put it a little in context, in our surveys, we really look at why are internships important and why are work-based experiential learning important? And one thing we know broadly, of course, is these experiences provide students with access to increased skills and being able to articulate and demonstrate their skills and proficiencies, social capital, expanded networks, and offer direct pathways to job offers and eventual jobs. So when we look at the data, for example, 80% of our employers have told us that the best return on investment of a recruiting strategy that they get is through internships. 80% said internships provide the best ROI in terms of recruiting as compared to on-campus visits, career fairs, on-campus panels, etc. So they're important, right? Internships are really important. And particularly on the student side, paid internships are essentially important. We know that for many students, particularly those from historically marginalized populations, they cannot take an unpaid internship. They simply cannot afford it. Right. So we need to continue to work on helping embed paid internships into the curriculum and help improve access. Because when we look at our data, we see that despite the fact that historically marginalized populations cannot afford to take an unpaid internship, they're overrepresented in unpaid internships. Women, students of color are overrepresented in unpaid internships or no internships at all. So this matters, right? Because internships are providing access to skills and students being able to demonstrate their skills, social capital. They also are providing access to jobs. So in our data, 50 to 60% of eligible interns convert to full-time employment. And not only do they convert, they have higher retention rates. So a year after the job offer, 76% of its employees who were interns at that organization are still in that organization, compared to 52% of first year of entry-level workers who did not perform an internship at that organization. So it matters, right? It matters in terms of job offers. And the other thing I want to quickly add is when we think about our faculty survey, that collaboration between faculty and career services is so important. We have been able to show in our data that students who use the Career Center are 2.2 times more likely to get a paid internship than no internship or an unpaid internship. So that is important. That's why when we think about real integration on the learning side, really integrating with faculty and Career Center professionals, we can see stronger outcomes for our students. And so that is also central to as we're thinking about these issues.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to come back. We're going to come back to that notion of collaboration in a little bit and dig into that a little bit more. So let's stick with this thread of high impact practices. Brandy, results from AAC&U's most recent employer study, the Career Ready Graduate, illustrated that while we often talk about internships with regard to career preparation as the thing that employers are most looking for, I might say it's kind of the coin of the realm in terms of what employers are looking for in terms of that background experience that students might have in college. We actually learned from our last 2023 study that like student employment or work-based work study on campuses, it ranks just as highly for employers as something they really value around what that kind of on-the-job experience might look like for students. And ASU is, I think, looking, maybe I'll just be bold and say I know ASU is increasingly being looked at as just a national model, both for the quality of implementation, the thoughtfulness with which a program is being implemented around student employment, but also just the pure scale of delivering on that level of quality. So would you tell us a little bit more about how that program works, how that lens has guided thinking about student success at ASU?
Sure, absolutely. And, I think echoing so much of what Mary shared as far as the data about the importance of internships and work-based learning opportunities, it's about intentional design, and it's about putting forward a desired set of learning outcomes. And that's, for many years, it took us to get to a point to really help nationally everybody understand that internships needed to be intentionally designed, and there needed to be space carved out and time carved out so that students had a learning opportunity while they were working. Well, for us, conceptually, the same thing comes into play with student employment. Talking about scale here at ASU, we employ a little over 12,000 students on an annual basis in part-time opportunities here on campus at ASU. And for us, it became a chance to say, we know that these students, they are working because they need to. As Mary alluded to and mentioned earlier, we're talking about populations and demographics of students that simply cannot afford to do unpaid opportunities. They cannot afford necessarily to engage in experiences that may be deemed more relevant work experiences if it doesn't necessarily fit into their life the way that they need to. So a lot of our students seek out the chance to work for their institution because of schedule, because of convenience, because of leniency and understanding of the academic calendar and the academic experience. And so at ASU, we said, well, this was a place that we actually needed to put more intentionality and design into our student employment experience. We know that we can offer a really high quality academic experience, but we should also be a good employer. We should be engaging our students through student employment in working and learning opportunities. How do we approach the idea of student employment? with the same intentionality that we talk to our employer partners and industry partners that they need to put into internship. We started an effort a couple years back. It's now known as Work Plus, and as you mentioned, we're doing work here at ASU, but also attempting to partner nationally with just exploring the student employment experience. How do we need to redesign experiences that have often been very deeply transactional in nature and actually turn them into intentionally designed working and learning opportunities so our students can really point to their student employment experience as a high impact experience for them, one where they built their skill set, and they can really understand and actually connect and articulate the experience of student employment as it's connected to their post-completion interests and goals, regardless of their major, regardless of what it is that they want to do after they graduate. All student employment experiences can be that opportunity for them to build these skills. And we really should be investing in seeing our student employees not just as an avenue to help us as departments and units on campus achieve goals or meet certain metrics. We need to be pouring back into these students with the same level of support and guidance and mentorship as what they're getting in internship experiences. Because oftentimes we're talking about students who don't necessarily have the ability to go out and take on more, to engage in another experience or another opportunity off campus or outside of what they're already committed to.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm just already realizing how much we have to unpack in this session. So excited for all of you listening in to follow up with any of us as we end the session. But Sherry, just really excited to get your vantage point in this. I think, that besides having great respect of the work you do, you just also bring this kind of expansiveness in how you've worked across sectors of higher education. This is really unique, having been at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and then working at the state system level in Maryland, and also at Bowdoin, a traditional liberal arts college. And we often say, right, in higher ed that many of the kinds of challenges that we experience often reside across sectors, but context matters. So there's always a balance in how we appreciate the diversity and the common threads we hold, but then also appreciation for that context. Given your vantage point, given that breadth of experience, what tools or frameworks do you see as providing those kinds of common threads or touchstones for guiding discussions around student agency and equity as we think about this topic?
Yeah, so, when I started at UMBC in the badging and digital credentialing at the system, it was 2015. I can think back on that seems like yesterday. But when we started that work, we started just as Mary was talking about, working with the Career Center. And at that time, we were looking at co-curricular experiences because we also knew that students were gaining these skills in lots of different ways, whether it was working on campus or being part of a student group. And there was no way for them to capture those competencies that we know as transferable skills, 21st century skills, pick your word, that the employers in our area were saying, well, we know they have these skills, but they can't articulate it. And so the goal was to really find ways to capture that learning and then have them to be able to reflect on what that meant to them, not just in those specific contexts, but as they would go forward into employment situations. So, the more these institutions are different, the more they're the same. I mean, I can tell you that I've worked at HBCUs, R1s, liberal arts schools, and they all have missions and vision statements that talk about these transferable skills. And they all have students who are working on campus and gaining these skills with no way to capture what they've learned along the way, right? So if they get a job in the summer and they want to go and tell an employer, well, I have this skill, they really don't have a solid way of displaying or describing it, and then being able to make that connection between how I can now apply the skill to your context. So we used, in all of the situations I worked in, AACU value rubrics have allowed us to be consistent in defining those skills along with the NACE competencies, because in the system specifically, we have students who move from school to school. We want to make sure that as they were going through and earning I'll talk about some of the macro credentials later, earning badges at these different schools, they meant the same thing at each institution. So if there were other levels of those skills that they could be gaining through credentials that would translate appropriately into that new context. So frameworks. I can't, I tell people, if you're going to start this, don't recreate the wheel. Use these well-defined, well-tested, tried and true frameworks. And not only do they help you and the people that you're helping to develop these types of credentials, but they also allow people, when they are received, to understand what framework they're based on. And so employers can have the same language as they're looking at what the students have earned in their academic careers.
Yes, thank you. And also just underscoring just how wonderful it's been to collaborate so closely with NACE over the last couple or few years, Mary, and think about how we help to bring some frameworks together that aren't these sources of vast difference that we might think they are, but these are actually quite compatible. The other quick thing that I want to underscore that you mentioned, Sherry, is how we think about the transferable lessons from institutions that are outside of our sector, right? Just to your point, if we have so much more in common than what's different, but how do we actually look at models like Gutman's ethnography of work program that we're going to talk about in a moment, and really think about like, how would that translate at a liberal arts college? There's so much great opportunity there. So when we go beyond evidence and frameworks, we still, right? This is why you're practitioners at the end of the day. We still need the practical strategies for linking innovation with student success and equity. I'd like to actually dig in a little bit around some of the curricular innovation and how curricular innovation and career preparedness come together. So specifically, I'd like to chat with you all about work-based learning as a high-impact pedagogy and also micro-credentials. So Sherry, we're gonna come back to you, because I thought, as I set up this question, I kind of want to start with micro-credentials, in part because I think people think we're going to end there. And oftentimes when we talk about this kind of summative endpoint, it ends up raising a bunch of issues about how you get to that endpoint and how would we think about addressing those challenges and opportunities. So how can we be thinking about micro-credentials as substantive markers of achievement of learning and commitments to equity and student success, rather than just another thing students are going to add to their LinkedIn profile, or something that's in fact less than a degree? How do we think about that compatibility?
Yeah, so I think one of the lessons that we've learned in the system of Maryland working with micro-credentials is that we recognize that students don't.
All these setup.
Oh, did we lose?
No, apologies. I'm getting feedback
I
from
think you're
something
doing the
else, and
right
I'm not
thing,
sure
but
where it's coming from. Are you hearing it?
I am hearing it.
So maybe go to the next person. Let me see if it's on my end. You know where that's coming from.
Okay. Brandy, let's come back to Sherry, and we'll come back to the micro credentials point. But as someone who brings the depth of experience in advising student affairs, career coaching, and now you're leading a national model about connecting learning and student employment, what practical strategies would you say, or what have you found that's encouraged faculty in particular, but certainly understanding you're working with staff as well, to think about connecting their career aspirations with their curricular learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one thing that we have started to talk a lot about in the past couple of years is a refocus of not just this look at time to degree, but this concept of time to value. That in order to retain our students and for them to persist to graduation, there needs to be a far sooner milestone they're hitting where they're seeing value in their degree program. They're seeing a value in the education that they're investing so much time, so much financial resource in. And so rather than looking solely at this milestone that might be 3, 4, 5 years away, how are we actually focused on how quickly can we help our learners feel and see value? And part of the way of doing that is ensuring that they have opportunity and experiences to apply that knowledge immediately that they're gaining in the classroom. And I think that for us, our approach has been really dialed into this idea of that integration into the academic experience. This is where students are already committed. They're already engaged in classes. they've already selected a degree program or a major to pursue. And we need to look across all of our degree programs that we're offering and ensuring that very soon after, starting with that degree program, that students are engaged in opportunities where, like I mentioned, they're actually applying to this work-based learning concept, or this work integrated learning concept, as we've referred to here at ASU, is really how are we building these things into the academic experience again, so students aren't having to seek other or seek outside what they've already committed to. For us, we're really dialed into this concept of micro projects and how are we partnering with industry. And similarly, that partnership of looking at how to build either part-time experiences or internship experiences is extremely valuable, but it's not scalable, and it's also not quite as accessible as it needs to be. There's an inherent social capital, professional capital that's necessary in order to engage and actually acquire internship experiences. And there's so much effort happening across the country to ensure that internship experiences are becoming more accessible, but we're simply not there yet. And so for us, we took a focus and a turn to how do we not only support the gold standard of internship opportunity, but how do we also take a look at other places and chances for us to ensure that these work experiences or these opportunities for students to be applying and practicing knowledge and skill set that they're building through their academic curriculum, it's built into their experience. So for us, it's that partnership with faculty and really helping them see and understand the connection and the opportunity and the chance to really help their students by the end of a semester or an end of a quarter, whatever that length may be, actually point to saying, it's like, not only did I learn this, but I actually had the chance to practically apply this in a project experience that was built by an employer, that was actually designed by an industry partner. And I may have gotten feedback, or I may have actually had the opportunity to explore something that I was thinking about post-completion through this project experience. So this value of not only that application of skill and knowledge, but also a value of exploration, of how do we ensure that our students are having as many opportunities as possible to practice and explore those interests, so that when they are graduating, they're stepping into an opportunity that they feel confident in having a previous experiences of exploring and saying, this is what I'm interested in. This is where I think I can bring my knowledge and my skill set to and find success and find purpose in what I'm doing post-completion.
Continue to love that notion of how we insert purpose into this conversation, of how part of what we're doing is building skills, but that purpose is a core center of how we might think about helping students to think about who they are in this in the equation as they're building those skills. And Brandy, your highlighting of the milestone aspect of this leads me back to thinking about micro credentials. And
I'm back.
Let's try again.
Yeah, sorry about the gremlins, but yeah, I think this is a really important point around micro credentials. I mean, we know that the completion rate for higher ed is not great. There, in fact, few students complete their degree in 4 years. A lot of schools have 6-year and 7-year completions, and some people just never finish. And so being able to capture the competencies as students are going through their programs gives them something to walk away with, right, in case they don't finish. But even more importantly, we have this concept of stackable credentials and micro-credentialing. And so while there is an ultimate goal you may be working toward, say you're working toward IPE or healthcare professions, as you complete milestones in the program, it could in fact improve and increase your salary in your current position. So we're looking at how can we build these milestones and mark them with micro-credentials that then can be stacked to greater skills and competencies. But if you don't make it, you still have something to show for what you've gotten out of your education, which can then help you with employment and your career. And I think the other piece about micro-credentials that's really important is that the evidence associated with the demonstration of a skill and competency is something that some people can't always speak to once they complete a degree. So maybe I'm going to use the healthcare example again, and I've learned a specific skill that's associated with patient care. I can have within that competency and within that micro-credential the exact assessments that I had to do, what I physically had to demonstrate, if it was a simulated project, so it shows those performance of skills. all of that transparency just yields a better scenario for those people who are earning those micro-credentials to move forward in different directions within their careers. So I think that when we think about micro-credentials, I like that you said, you know, think about them. It's almost backwards design, right? What are the outcomes? Think with the end in mind, and what can we do to demonstrate these competencies and skills that these learners are earning and gaining as they do things both inside of the classroom and outside the classroom. I'm going to keep stressing that because the work and the co-curricular activities that students participate in have all of these types of skills embedded in them. And we just really need to be deliberate in calling those out and identifying how they're able to demonstrate those skills and reflect on them.
100%. It occurs to me as you say that, Sherry, one thing that we're probably not going to get to today, or we might sneak it in somewhere, is credit for prior learning. You know, how do we actually even think about all of these topics in the context of credit for prior learning, really honoring students' experience and the skill set that they bring with them, right, in this kind of asset-based approach. Just to underscore something you mentioned, for anybody who's wondering about the data, National Student Clearinghouse recent data on the number of adults out there with some college but no credential is 40 million. So the opportunity here to be thinking far more innovatively, far more integratively about how we're acknowledging those achievements, those milestones that Brandy mentioned, what you're talking about with micro-credentials is such an important piece of the student success equation that we're talking about.
Yeah, Ashley, I think just one other thing. I think one thing that we've learned in the work at the System of Maryland is it also makes the institutions reflect on where you're providing opportunities for these skills to be demonstrated. And this is on the equity piece. Like, we can't just embed micro-credentials in certain types of activities. We need to go to where the students are and the things they're participating in to ensure that everybody's getting the same opportunities to demonstrate those skills. So, you know, that's something that I'm very passionate about, you know, because, you know, people focus on certain types of areas, and there we have a really wide variety of students who participate in a lot of different things, and we just need to make sure that we're embedding those deliberate and intentional markers and documenting those skills where they are. Right. It goes back to what Brandy was saying. People don't have time to go and do things outside of school. They're already busy or they can't afford to do it. So it's about equity and being able to capture skills and take them forward.
For sure. And one of the things that we can be thinking about exactly to that point is, you know, that access, that opportunity piece, and really thinking about how do we leverage what I like to refer to as curricular anchors, those things that are simply unavoidable for students. And it's one of the ways that we can think about those first-year programs, for example, that are required for students or somehow are being embedded in ways that it's fundamental to the curricular journey. So they're expected that students complete those experiences. One of the very best, and the reason that Mary and I got connected several years ago now at this point, is because I reached out to her. At the time, she was helping to lead Gutman's, the Charles and Stella Gutman Community College first-year program called Ethnography of Work. And I had heard about this program in a meeting I was in and was so taken by it, was so taken by the idea of linking something so connected to a career context, or literally a work context, but deeply entrenched in the actual skills of a discipline. It's an ethnography. So it's a program that speaks to that notion of work-based learning, how we can connect that kind of career context with an experiential research component, right? That really strikes at the core of what many faculty are about and what they value. So, Mary, you know this program better than anyone, having been so deeply connected with it. What examples from this program can you share that help illustrate the impact of effective pedagogy around work-based learning, but also then thinking about student success and equity?
Yeah, so it absolutely everything you said, Ashley. And I think we were both drawn to it because we're both sociologists, right? So Ethnographies of Work is a social science course. It is taught by mostly sociologists, but also anthropologists. And the idea is to take a course in the discipline, in the social science realm, using the methods, the theory, the readings in the discipline, but center it around career and literally embed career in the course. So at Gutman, it is part of the first year experience. So all students take, regardless of their major, And we teach the ethnographic methods and the sociology of work, systems of inequality at work, social capital, social networking, within this all a framework of work. So students spend time learning methods, right, gaining methodological skills, and learning sociology, but within the career context. So they are conducting ethnographic research, which means they're going out and doing workplace observations, workplace interviews, in around work. So it's exciting. And I think what faculty are also really drawn to is the academic rigor is there, right? But this is about embedding career into a course, very academically rigorous. Students have to meet the academic goals of a social science course, but are able to explore career. So when I taught the course, one of the things that I did, and kind of thinking about our NACE competencies, because you can align what's happening with your outcomes here with the competencies, right? So students can not only mention that they're learning sociology, right? They're also able to demonstrate to employers their competency development through the course. Is students would work as a research team, for example, on a workplace problem. So issues of equity in STEM, for example, or emotional labor of social work profession. And they would, in essence, be a consulting group working on a research project to address the problem. They would be using ethnographic skills. They would be reaching out to employers. They would be conducting observations, conducting interviews, gathering literature, gathering data, all while investigating work, right? And investigating workplaces that they may be interested in. Or I had examples of students who did go, for example, in healthcare and realize, oh my goodness, this is not what I want to do. So what an opportunity to be able to do that in a course as opposed to doing that in your first job, right? So some of what comes out of it, obviously, is just opening up worlds of work to students. And that is something really critical. We did field work each week in different levels. And so students were opened up to a lot of different workplaces. So they're able to understand kind of specific workplace practices, specific workplace hierarchies, understand systems of inequality. Students who, particularly at Gutman, many are whom first generation students of color, will be entering into predominantly white workplaces going forward, right? So how can we help students understand and then work to disassemble, right, these systems of inequality when they're there? So being able to see those workplace practices, and then also the social capital that comes from just the exposure and the connection with employers. Students are able to make networking relationships, right? It could lead to internships for some of the students, for example. So it's a way of also honoring students' lives too, right? So we talked about students having multiple constraints on their lives while they're completing their education. So embedding it into the course directly, and then working within that course time period to help students gain access to work is a way of diminishing some of those barriers. So it's really, I think, an exciting way, and I think it's a real, powerful way to integrate career into the curriculum. And the other last thing I want to say is students were ethnographers, right? So when they would go to work, I would stress you're going as an ethnographer. You're going as if I am an ethnographer doing work. That's what I would do, and it brought them a sense of power in those situations, right? I mean, they were going in to be a sociologist, to be a researcher, and they had the skills to do it, right? Because we learned them through the course and practiced them. So I think that's also an important aspect of the course too, just the power of student as researcher in the workplace. So it's it's definitely an exciting way, and it can be embedded in many schools. Don't have the space for a 2-semester course, certainly. Gutman was unique in that it was a new college, so the curriculum was more open. But there are ways of embedding this. Many colleges have worked to Bunker Hill in Boston is a great example of a school that has embedded these into courses more in a modular format. And it's just a way of really helping to decrease some of those barriers that students face.
Thank you. Mary, I loved your phrase, opening up worlds of work. right? This idea that part of what we're helping students to do is simply expand their notion of where jobs come from and where career paths lie. And I think we bring a vantage point of faculty, career center directors bring a vantage point. The staff working around with the registrar, right? There's Sherry, your lens of working both with faculty and staff, and from even a technology angle. Like once we really step back and think about what creates the opportunities and the learning experience that students might have in a really fulsome way, we're acutely aware that it's not just one stakeholder or another, it's all of us working in collaboration. And I've had the great fortune of meeting all of you through running AAC&U's Curriculum to Career Innovations Institute and our programming around this topic of really authentically integrating work-based learning into the curriculum. And I think one of the things that I've learned just from working with the three of you, but also in doing that work is the real value, of course, of collaboration, doing the work of connecting learning through the disciplines, general education as an incredible lever for how we're thinking about this, both general education and the majors, but how we think about true partnerships and collaboration along the way, how we really think about what those levers are, those entry points to discussion. How do we get beyond just saying, oh, we ought to work together, and how do we actually get some work done together? So I want your take on collaboration, but I want to ask it a really specific way, because I know we all believe in it. And we definitely probably have people listening in that want to have a better sense of where to start. So I want to ask it this way. If you were advising a campus on where or what area or office they should start that collaboration with, whether it's faculty or academic affairs, through student affairs, through other areas, advising, through other areas of campus life, what office would that be? Where would you recommend starting that conversation? So what is one piece of advice you'd offer for developing that conversation into an authentic and sustained partnership? Brandy, we're going to start with you.
Feel bad starting with me because I think I'm not going to give the answer, one of the best answers, which is simply that I have a really hard time recommending like a singular office or space. It's more about the type of people. I really think we have found the most success in the work that we're doing both internally at ASU and then also nationally about actually really being open and clear with the type of people we want to work with and we're looking to work with. And it's people, it's really about mindset. It's really about perspective. It's really about finding the people who are willing to acknowledge that change and evolution is needed. There's so much data and research coming out very specifically about work-based learning and the both economic and non-economic impact that it has. And there's also that research shows that our students, Mary's touched on it, Sherry's touched on it, these students, we're talking about students of color, we're talking about students from first generation families, we're talking about students, female students in particular, and even controlling for field of study. These students do not have access and do not have engage in these experiences at the levels that they need to experience the impact. You need to find people who will hear that and who will acknowledge and say, we can, should, and need to do better. We need to transform the experience. I actually think interdisciplinary collaboration, so finding people, so Ashley, to your point about people that are connected to career, people that are connected to advising, you're talking about faculty, getting the word out there about the type of work you're trying to do or the type of transformation you're seeking, and finding the people that are saying, yes, we need to evolve. Yes, I'm willing to come to the table as a co-designer. I invest in how do we explore these questions together? How do we try things even at a small scale and acknowledge impact and iterate upon that? So I'd love to say you've got this one particular office or this one particular place to go to, but I will say from our experience, we have found the most success in actually gathering kind of this interdisciplinary movement of people because there's a shared mindset and a shared belief and a shared acknowledgement of what the research and the data is showing us in the past couple of years of the types of experiences our students need to engage in to actually feel the most impact and feel the most like true student success by engaging in these experiences. And these are the people who say, we're willing to figure out how to do it better. So I'm sorry to not point you to exactly one or recommend, but that's for us, that's very truly and strongly, I think, how we've seen the most success in the work that we've been doing.
In fairness, it's a deeply unfair question. So pick one. So Mary, let's go to you.
Yeah, I'm going to actually echo what Brandy said. You know, I think it really is about finding those champions on the faculty side and on the student life side and career centers. I also think the learning communities are really powerful. So I don't think it is as much a office as much as it's as Brandy talked about, the individuals across discipline and across the campus who come together as a learning community. In our research that we just did with you all and the Society for Experiential Education on faculty, we did ask faculty. So 93% of faculty said within the past year, a student in their discipline area asked them for a career advice. But then we said, well, what type of career advice? And what we saw was students were asking faculty about jobs they can do with their major, graduate school. What graduate school would be like, workplace practices. What they the least asked about were assembling the resume, prepping for a job interview, using a job board, right? So students know really where to go, right? That is stuff that you work with the Career Center and your career advisors on. So I think that data point is so interesting. And similarly, we did ask about alumni coming back, and I think it was 66% of faculty said, yeah, in the past year, an alumni has reached back. And it's the same thing. Alumni don't want help prepping for a job interview or updating their CV. They want to talk about graduate school. They want to talk about their workplace practices with faculty. So I think what that points to is this is a collaborative endeavor. And that we need to develop these communities, whether they're learning communities, where we can bring these folks together so that faculty aren't just referring students, but actually can talk in the classroom about what is it about the resume? What, how does that connect? And then really work together on bringing that forward. So I'm going to follow Brandy in saying there's not an office, but I do think there's great potential.
Right. Thank you. Sherry, give you the last word here.
Plus one. I mean, this is the work I do like all the time, and I've started these programs at different types of schools, and you really do have to find people who get it and who want to work with you. And I tend to put out tentacles across the entire institution to find those people, because most of what you're doing in the beginning is awareness and education, to then have those people drawn out. And the thing I always tell people when you start this work, please don't do it without pointing to the mission and vision of your institution. It's hard to argue with the fact that these things are called out in the mission and vision statements. I haven't found one that a school that is in some way this type of work is not called out in the school's goals. So doing that, and then finding those people who will work with you and let them, as Mary said, become your champions, who do the groundswell. And I typically also find a faculty member who is like feet in the ground, too busy, we can't do this, and turn that person. I mean, offer as much help and encouragement and support to get, the first iteration or wave of whatever we're trying to accomplish, and let that person talk about how they have been transformed and how they saw this process and now what they see, the outcomes are for students and the values. So I think it was a mean question, Ashley, because there isn't one. But you do have to be intentional about your approach and who you work with, and how you educate the community on the whys.
Yeah, beautiful piece of advice there. So I know we're at time, and everybody could tell feels like we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg of all the things that we could talk about, how much deeper we could go into any of these individual topics. I do have consent from Mary, Sherry, and Brandy that you are welcome to follow up with them around any of the topics that they've touched on, and certainly welcome to follow up with me. I'm serving as a coach for the Institute, but certainly offline as well. And just my thanks, as always, to these amazing colleagues, beautiful colleagues. I love the work you do, and I love working with you, Brandy, Mary, and Sherry. Thank you so much for doing this. And we will wish you well and hope you learn a lot at the Institute. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.